Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to Season 3 of the Logical Christian Podcast. I'm your Logical Christian, Dan Irwin. The Logical Christian Podcast is not here to tell you what to think. It's an exercise in how to think. Rather than just accept what we're being told with regard to current events, politics, science, religion, and everything else, we're going to stop the spin, ask questions, dive deep, and look at the world logically. And since logic is a gift from God, most importantly, we're going to look at it all as Christians. Links can be found in the show notes if you'd like to follow along. So with that, let's go be logical Christians. We all have some level of cognitive bias. Put simply, we all have a worldview that places a spin on the way we view, understand, and interpret facts. These biases can range from trivial to substantial to severe, even potentially affecting life and death. But usually they're not that bad, but sometimes they are. What's interesting is that some people seem to have much greater levels of cognitive biasization than others, to the point that the facts, the plain, seemingly clear facts, can be slapping them in the face, and they still either can't or won't admit what they should be seeing. If you don't know anyone like that, I may have some bad news for you. But don't worry, you won't believe me anyway. On today's episode, first we're going to stare life right in its non-living face, then we're going to witness a master's class in missing the point, and finally, what in the world are you talking about? I'm doing just fine. No, you're the crazy one. So prepare yourself to never look at pencils the same again, then forget all of that old stuff. It's all about the new. And finally, no, I said you're the crazy one. Look, just here we go. So guys, I just checked, and this very day is yet another day. And as we always say, another day, and I'm pretty sure I don't even have to finish this for you, but another day, another new theory on how life began on this earth is formulated by evolutionary scientists who have determined that evolution must be true, completely ignoring the written historical account of creation as revealed in the Bible, thus not doing science at all. Yeah, that old saying. Found on SciTechDaily.com, headline, Cambridge scientists unveil new theory on origins of life's building blocks. Okay, look, I get it. I can hear you huff. I can see your eyes rolling from here. I mean, you remind me of my kid, eyes rolling like slot machine reels, all the while saying, I didn't roll my eyes, I looked over at, and then she completes her lies with something that she absolutely was not looking at. I mean, when you see the entire pupil and the iris disappear into the back of her head and just that possessed-looking white ball staring back at you, I mean, she ain't looking at nothing. She knows it. I know it. Anyway, pardon my parent-on-the-edge digression. Okay, all that said, I get it. I feel like I'm covering something evolutionish about every other episode. And I could go back and confirm if that's true or not, but as we know, my feelings are my truth. And President Vegetable told us a long time ago that we value truth over facts. So I openly refuse to confirm anything. My point is that you have no idea how many evolution articles I read and don't save, or how many I read and do save, and how many I never bring to this podcast. And I know by my reading these stupid things, my algorithm is completely screwed up, so they just keep feeding me more and more. And it's simply amazing how many evolution-related articles there are about a new discovery this and a missing link that, and this rewrites the entire timeline of this other thing. It's just endless. I should create a book of just evolution articles showing this progression of fantasy. I won't, but I should. So although I quite often forego the opportunity to bring all of the evolution-related articles that I see to you, there are some that are just more special than others. And this one is special. It's just really just very special. And my hope is that you get as big of a kick out of this hogwashery as I do. All right, let's get started. Travel with me, if you will, across the pond to our former overlords, now our underlings, the island nation of the United Kingdom. The location, Cambridge University. The scientific researchers, Dr. Paul Rimmer, Assistant Professor of Experimental Astrophysics at the Cavendish Laboratory, and Dr. Oliver Shortall, Professor of Natural Philosophy at the Institute of Astronomy and Department of Earth Sciences in Cambridge. And probably some other people, but we don't care about them. The hypothesis, quote, that essential molecules for life's development might have originated from a process called graphitization. The implication, quote, "If confirmed through laboratory experiments, this could enable us to simulate conditions that are likely to have led to the emergence of life." And it didn't take us long before we got to the first implied factual assumption. If this is confirmed, this could enable us to simulate conditions that are likely to have led to the emergence of life. Okay, let's do some work here. As the article states, quote, "It has long been debated how the seemingly fortuitous conditions for life arose in nature, with many hypotheses reaching dead ends." Yes, seemingly fortuitous conditions. What a bunch of lucky ducks we are. I'd also argue that all the hypotheses have reached dead ends because if one or more hadn't, we'd know all about it, as they'd be evolutionizing life in the lab from nothing, just all of the time. Plus, if we think we nailed it, we wouldn't still be searching for it. I once again digress. The problem that all these scientists are trying to overcome, resulting in these many hypotheses, none of which have borne any fruit at all, is how did any of the building blocks of life come into being from the chemicals that in no way are alive? They're not trying to say that a lightning bolt struck brackish water and a tadpole formed or anything. At least most of them aren't saying that. They're simply trying to get anything they consider to be a building block from theoretical chemicals in an atmosphere they believe existed on this lifeless rock hurtling through space. The Miller-Urey experiment from 1952 is attempting to create amino acids. They sort of did, but they weren't the right kinds or the right amount, and they were short-lived, and that was, of course, after the very, very highly controlled experiment filtered off all of the toxic byproducts so the amino acids weren't destroyed, immediately, just like nature would do to them. Hypotheses, theories, and experiments have attempted to create fatty acids, peptides, RNA, enzymes, and in the case of our theory in question for this article, proteins. The next level of theories and hypotheses have to do with how these building blocks then evolved and mutated, totally randomly, of course, to actually form a very simple, single-cell life form, which at this point isn't even able to be experimented with yet because they can't get the first part to work. Quote, "Life is governed by molecules called proteins, phospholipids, and nucleotides. Past research suggests that useful molecules containing nitrogen, like nitriles, cyanoacetylene, and hydrogen cyanide, and isonitriles, isocyanide, and methyl isocyanide, could be used to make these building blocks of life. As of yet, though, there has been no clear way to make all of these in the same environment in substantial amounts. However, everything you thought you knew about these nitrile and isonitrile cyanides and acetylenes creating life's very building blocks is about to change. So just go ahead and forget everything you've learned about those things." This research team has found that, quote, "significant quantities of these useful molecules can be theoretically made through a process called graphitization." As I was saying about the Miller-Urey experiment, quote, "Much of the problem with previous models is that a range of other products are created along with the nitriles. This makes a messy system that hinders the formation of life." And no, the problem isn't that it creates a messy system that, hinders. The problem is that it relies on a toxic atmosphere and a toxic sludge and an electrical spark that in no way could create the building blocks of life. And if it did spark and spontaneously form something, it forms a toxic goo that in no way would allow a building block to survive. Additionally, they have to remove oxygen from this system. See, oxygen oxidizes. It causes these building blocks to break down and, for lack of a better term, die rapidly. However, life relies on oxygen to live, so this isn't a messy system. All that's ever been created in the past is a system that is very, very carefully directed and guided by a higher intelligence, that in no way could create or sustain life if left to natural processes, and didn't nor couldn't create anything that could ever form into life, even if it did survive, for lack of a better term, for longer than, no time at all. But, as Dr. Rimmer states, quote, "A big part of life is simplicity. It's order. It's coming up with a way to get rid of some of the complexity by controlling what chemistry can happen." And that raises the question, at least in my mind, is it? Life, even the most simple single-cell organisms, are unbelievably complex. The amount of information that's contained in each cell is also massively complex, and evolution is not controlled. It's a process that defies all known natural laws by bringing order from chaos with no guidance, no direction, no control whatsoever. And this is theoretically where graphitization comes in. The article says, quote, "We don't expect life to be produced in a messy environment. So what is fascinating is how graphitization itself cleans the environment, since the process exclusively creates these nitriles and isonitriles with mostly inert side products." Mostly inert. They then have a handy-dandy illustration that shows the process, which, it's fascinating, to be honest. It shows the atmosphere at 4.5 billion years ago, and then at 4.3 billion years ago, and then about 1,000 years after that, which is amazingly accurate for billions of years, then 1,000,000 years after that, then a few 100 million years after that. It's amazing what science absolutely knows to be true, despite there being absolutely no possible way for them to ever even come remotely close to knowing this. But let's go through their explanation as to how all of this works, for a lark. We're going to use a lot of quotes from the article because this is why I wanted to bring it to you. Quote, "The Hadean Eon was the earliest period in Earth's history, when the Earth was very different from our modern Earth. Impacts with debris, sometimes the size of planets, were not unheard of. The study theorizes that when the early Earth was hit by an object roughly the size of the Moon, around 4.3 billion years ago, the iron that it contained reacted with water on Earth." Okay, is it just me, or is this the first time that you've heard of the very early Earth being impacted by planet-sized debris? Now, I looked it up. There is a giant impact hypothesis. I've heard of this before. I believe we've talked about this before. This is the theory that the Earth was impacted by a massive object. Wikipedia says roughly the size of Mars, about 4.5 billion years ago. That caused a large chunk of the early Earth to be ejected, which is what formed the Moon. That might bring it back to your memory that we've talked about this. But I don't think I've ever heard the multiple planet-sized impact thing like they're saying. But okay, whatever. Let's go with this debris. Planet-sized debris, then a moon-sized object allegedly composed of a large amount of iron smashed into the Earth. Sure. We're going with that. Okay. So the iron giant smashes into the Earth. The iron deposits into the Earth, and then, quote, "The products of the iron-water reaction condense into a tar on the surface of the Earth. The tar then reacts with magma at over 1,500 degrees Celsius, and the carbon in the tar becomes graphite, a highly stable form of carbon, and what we use in modern pencil leads." Now remember, this is nothing but a theory. It's a hypothesis of which they haven't even conducted an experiment yet trying to prove it out in a highly controlled environment, but they're speaking as if this is absolutely known and true and correct. As for their theory, I can honestly say that I've never seen iron and water react to make a tar. I've seen it make rust, but not tar. Tar, and I know they're saying a tar-like substance, but tar is usually a petroleum or a plant-based goo. In fact, in their little diagram, they even show that there's a giant impact and the iron and water react to make hydrogen and iron oxide. Iron oxide is rust. Hydrogen is a gas, and that creates a layer of tar. I don't get that, but okay, we've got the moon-sized iron, and we've got tar out of rust. We're going with this. Okay. The next frame of the illustration shows that the rust mixes with the magma, but their explanation says that the carbon in the tar mixes with the magma, but iron oxide doesn't contain carbon. So where the carbon comes from? Well, they say that the atmosphere prior to the impact was made up of water, as vapor, I'm assuming, hydrogen, nitrogen, carbon monoxide, and carbon dioxide. Now, note that they don't show oxygen in the mix because they can't have oxygen in the mix, although they absolutely do need it. But they don't need it, but they do. Then, post-impact, we get the iron oxide. We still have iron. All the water is now gone. They don't show any liquid water or vapor. And the atmosphere is now hydrogen, ammonia, and methane. So the atmosphere is very toxic and flammable, real explosive, really. But that's where they get the carbon, I think, is from the atmosphere. But they don't show how the carbon mixed with the iron oxide and the water to make a tar. Now, I'm not claiming to be a chemist, but chemicals and elements don't just do the things you want them to do. They have to react in certain ways in order for elements to crack off of other elements and to cling to different elements, which makes different compounds and molecules. So iron oxide doesn't just go grab a carbon and form a tar, which is ironically what they're showing in their diagram, is that it doesn't do that, but they say it does. Okay. The iron oxide that doesn't contain carbon, and if it did, wouldn't form a tar, is submerged now in what would be considered to be magma at a temperature at the top end of the scale for what we know as magma today. Okay, which incidentally, magma doesn't contain carbon either, in case you're wondering. And then this all creates graphite, which when you look up the theory of where natural graphite came from, this isn't it. But okay, none of that matters. We're working on a hypothesis of life here. Literally anything goes at this point. And this is something I found with evolutionary theory. It's split into many small subcategories of evolution, and each has its own very specific specialization for various scientists, and they each work in their own little bubble. They're not really concerned so much with ensuring their theory matches with the other guy's theory. They're more concerned with their little theory working within the boundaries that they've set for themselves. It's quite literally a marvel that this is considered science at all, to be totally honest. But back to our theory. We now have the most magical graphite of all, or as Dr. Shortle says, quote, once the iron reacts with the water, a mist forms that would have condensed and mixed with the Earth's crust. Upon heating, what's left is, lo and behold, the useful nitrogen-containing compounds. And I want you to know that lo and behold was not me, that was in the quote. So, hold on. Now we have nitrogen, right? Because now we have the useful nitrogen-containing compounds. That's what Dr. Shortle said. So now we have nitrogen. This apparently happens somewhere in that 1,000-year period shown by the next frame of the illustration, which shows the same atmosphere as before, the toxic and explosive one, but now with the addition of methylene and free nitrogen, making the hydrogen cyanide and a hydrogen ion, as well as other compounds they want apparently in the ground is what they're showing. Like I said, I'm not a chemist, and I know they're not showing everything in these frames, but there sure seems to be some voodoo hinky magic going on here. That's my professional opinion. The article goes on to state their evidence for this. They say that their evidence is partially taken from the presence of comatic rocks. This is a type of rock that forms when very hot magma, like 1500 degrees C, ironically enough, cools. Back to our Mr. Dr. Shortle. Comatite was originally found in South Africa. The rocks date back to around 3.5 billion years ago. Crucially, we know that these rocks only form at scorching temperatures around 1700 degrees C. That means the magma would already have been hot enough to heat the tar and create our useful nitriles. So now we're at 1700 degrees C, not the 1500, which is above actually the top of our scale for magma today that we know of. And these rocks date back to 3.5 billion years ago, but our graphite is forming 4 billion years ago. And I know they're saying that that's only a difference of 0.5, but that's actually 500 million years in between the 3.5 and the 4. But I think what they're trying to say is that if the magma was 1500 or maybe 1700 degrees C, 500 million years after the graphite formed, then we absolutely know for sure that it was at least that hot, if not hotter, 500 million years earlier when the graphite formed. But how? How do we know that? Well, that's making a logical leap based on the idea that the Earth started hot and it's cooled over time. But they don't really know that. That's just kind of a guess. But the article says, quote, with the link confirmed, the authors suggest that nitrogen-containing compounds would be made via this method. This is where we move into the last two frames of their illustration, which moves through 500 million years, apparently, showing, I'm not sure, actually. I guess the Earth cools, the atmosphere clears, there are seams of graphite that form in the magma, and all of that sweet, sweet compound nitrogen stuff comes filtering to the top through the graphite. Graphitization. All is right with the world at this point, and Bob's your uncle. Life. Or at least the chemicals needed to make life. Allegedly. Then we move into the last section of the article, entitled, What Next? Well, what's next is to try to prove what they've theorized on paper and in whatever fevered dreams they've had by conducting experiments in a very controlled lab. Quote, now experiments must try to recreate these conditions in the lab and study whether the water, which is inevitably in the system, eats up the nitrogen compounds, breaking them apart. So they assume water, because from an evolutionary theory, water equals life. This is why we're so focused on finding ice or liquid water on other planets or asteroids or whatever, because if water exists, life could exist, per their theory. But one more thing we need to keep in mind, this is not like the Miller-Urey experiment or any other experiment out there trying to produce a building block of life. No, this is creating the building blocks to create the building blocks of life, or at least an attempt to do so. We'll give His Honor Sir Lord Dr. Rimmer the last word. Quote, though we don't know for sure that these molecules started out life on Earth, we do know that life's building blocks must be made from molecules that survived in water. If future experiments show that the nitriles all fall apart, then we'll have to look for a different way. Now look, I'm not a prophet by any stretch of the imagination, but I kind of think Rimmer and Shortle should start looking for a different way. This is going to fall apart. And if it doesn't fall apart, what have they proven? To be honest, nothing. They've proven nothing. They've proven, as have all experiments attempting to spontaneously generate some sort of building block of life, that even with a sterile lab environment, under very strict experimental conditions, with admittedly very smart people carefully watching and guiding the experiment, they can't do it. At our current level of intelligence, which seems like it's pretty high, we can't create the most rudimentary building block of life from a non-living chemical soup. But we're expected to believe that nature could fight its way through all the obstacles, could literally move from said non-living chemical soup and toxic chemicals and superheated magma and planet-sized collisions, hundreds of millions of years of chemical reactions, to create order from chaos, overcome all odds, and create life from non-life. And even there, I've humanized nature at this point. Nature doesn't fight to do anything. Nature is nature. This is quite literally relying on random chance. I mean, this is not just implausible. It's quite literally impossible. And yet, not only are we expected to believe this happened on this planet, we're expected to believe that this happened on other planets as well, possibly much earlier in the history of the universe, to the point that other civilizations are massively advanced as compared to us, or maybe not. Maybe other planets are only at the single cell stage. And did this happen the same way on other planets? Or are there many, or at least multiple ways that life could come from non-life through complete randomness? And is that planet specific? Or are we just this inept that we, even with all our evolved brain power, all our research, technology, and experimentation, we can't make a single sustainable building block of life from non-life? And yes, we We are that inept, or at least so it seems. If we back all the way back up to the start of the article, back to Dr. Rimmer's comment, quote, "A big part of life is simplicity, it's order." And although, admittedly, life is complex, it's very complex, the world that Dr. Rimmer or Dr. Shortle or so many others live in, even in their most simplified theory, is impossibly complex. Emphatically emphasizing the word impossible. Rimmer is absolutely correct. A big part of life is simplicity. It is order. And order didn't randomly, as luck would have it, come from chaos. Order comes from stability, from predictability, from universal laws which come from a lawgiver, from a creator who is able to not only create the complex and create the laws and the order and reveal the simplicity in the complex, but to maintain it all. A creation demands a creator, not random chance. Order demands maintenance, which demands a maintainer. I mean, look at your sink full of dishes. Look at your lawn, the paint on your house or your car or the roads, your face, your body, my body. If someone doesn't maintain all of this, it's not going to do it on its own. Trust me, I've seen my body and my face, and someone is falling down on his or her job, let me tell you. Let me remind you of Romans 1. "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth." You see, it's because of our sin that we don't even want to know the truth. "For what can be known about God is plain to them." Think simple and ordered and obvious, because God has shown it to them. "For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made, so they are without excuse." A design demands a designer, creation, a creator, order, a maintainer, clearly. "For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God, the designer, creator, maintainer, for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things." And I wouldn't say this is why, but isn't it interesting that the order given is the opposite order of evolution? Paul says man chooses to deny what they see, deny what they know by simple instinct, and worship man, birds, animals, and creeping things. Evolution says, worship me. I created creeping things, then animals, which then split and transformed into some birds and some humans. Look how amazing I am. And since evolution offered nothing but phantoms to worship, nothing tangible, nothing to lord over humankind, that meant that humans, as the highest form of intelligence on the planet, in the universe, well, we became God. Evolution was pleasing to the eye. It was sweet on the tongue, goes down smooth. So we partook, and our eyes were opened, and we became like God, knowing, nay, deciding what is right and what is wrong. And of course, we can see what a bang-up job we've done with our foolish wisdom, our wide-open blind eyes, and our sliding scale of morality, can't we? This is why we trust our Bible. We don't allow the wisdom of the world to infiltrate where the Bible is clear. Glenn Beck recently had his weekly special whatever thing with guest Hugh Ross. If you don't know who Hugh Ross is, he's an old earth, Big Bang believing individual who claims to be a Christian. He's had his own apologetics ministry for nearly 40 years now, called Reasons to Believe. On his website, he claims to be developing, along with his colleagues, quote, "a biblical creation model that is testable and predictive." In other words, he's trying to shoehorn evolution, or parts of evolution, into the creation narrative that's clearly and plainly written for us in the first chapter, or two if you'd like, of Genesis. He claims to have found Jesus through evolution, more specifically through the Big Bang. I listened to the Glenn Beck special. Glenn, of course, was fascinated. I was doing all I could not to yell at my poor phone, which was only podcasting what I asked of it. As with all evolutionary models, the massive complexity, the leaps of logic, the assumptions, and the faith placed in the theory, and with Ross, the added complexity of quite literally twisting the English meaning of scriptures, and in some cases, the actual Hebrew or Greek, to make the Bible say what it's clearly not saying, if read in actual context, was mind-numbing. Just pick any Hugh Ross video, and you'll get a guy who will take a topic, he'll drone on about it with supposed evidence and dating techniques and faulty assumptions based on bad math, wrapping it up with an explanation on how the Bible isn't saying what it's clearly saying. For what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them, for his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. Hugh Ross is without excuse. He, just like Rimmer and Shortle, are clearly very intelligent human beings, but they've chosen to suppress the truth and believe a lie, and professing to be wise, they've shown themselves to be fools. Now, am I saying that Hugh Ross isn't saved? I'm not saying that, but I'm not saying that either. He might be. The question in my mind is, when we say salvation is repentance and faith, or repentance and belief, how much of God's word can we choose to disbelieve and still be in the ballpark? And I don't know. This is why we study to know what we believe and why, and always bring our belief back to the Bible. Where our beliefs conflict with the Bible, my recommendation is to go with what the Bible says until you can prove the Bible or the biblical interpretation wrong. And also, good luck with that. So to try to land this flaming Hindenburg of a podcast segment, our article was entitled, Cambridge Scientists Unveil New Theory on Origin of Life's Building Blocks. Did they do this? Yep, they unveiled a new theory. Will this new theory produce building blocks of life? No, it won't. They could even potentially produce protein-like bits and pieces, but would it be life? No. Would it lead to life? No. No, this is a waste of time and money and brain power and however many lives there are involved in this study. They're looking for life when it's already been shown to them, clearly, plainly, simply, and orderly, and for that matter, textually. Read it. By the sovereign creator of the universe. In the beginning, God created man and woman and religion. Now, that's not the typical reading of Genesis, but that is what happened. Religion is defined in the American Heritage Dictionary of the English Language as, quote, the belief in and reverence for a supernatural power or powers regarded as creating and governing the universe. Adam and Eve were created. They believed in God, no question there. They knew that God was God, a supernatural power, the creator and maintainer and governor of the universe, at least however they defined universe. They knew that God was the rule giver and the one who had the right, the authority to make the rules. Ergo and voila, probably abracadabra, but not in a blasphemous sort of way, the first instance of religion in history. Then at some point we get a second religion, a faux religion, if you will. Oh, and I think you will, with Satan leading a rebellion of angels, all being cast out of heaven. We have Satan communicating to Eve through the snake, however exactly that worked. Has God really said? And God didn't mean that. Don't be a silly head. He just doesn't want you to be a god like he is. Eve and then Adam took that gamble, bit off more than they could chew, if you'll pardon the pun. Oh, and I think you will. And we have the first sin, the first penalty of sin. So the first enactment of justice also on this earth. The first sacrifice for sin, which is the first act of mercy on this earth. Then a lot of things happen that we're simply not told about, or at least not much about. And 1,500 years later, we have a world teeming with religions. Again, none that we're really told about, but people were believing something. They were believing in some form of something that created the universe, that governs things, whether that was an atheistic religion, which, make no mistake, the choice to not believe in a religion is the choice to believe in a religion, or some other form of pagan religion. The other religions were apparently so pervasive that only one man and his wife and his 3 sons and their wives were still worshiping the one true God in the only true religion. Then 100 years after the flood, we get the Tower of Babel. The instance where a humanist religion was or had taken over again. People were scattered because of their sin, with the newly formed people groups, new languages, newly forming ethnicities, new cultures, new created religions. In fairly short order, we had various forms of mythologies popping up, the earliest manifestations of Greek, Egyptian, Roman, Norse, and Syrian mythology. Some took root, kept progressing, some died out faster than others. As we move through history, now less than 1,000 years before the birth of Christ on earth, we start finding names we know. Buddhism, Confucianism, Stoicism, Hinduism, hedonism, Epicureanism, and probably the most fun one to say if we're being honest, and I think we are, Zoroastrianism. And through all of this, what we know as Judaism today, it continues through first the family, then the clans, then all of Israel, then parts of Israel, but it continues. And then we get to Jesus, the Christ, born, lived, then died, but only for a few days. Then he, being fully man, but also fully God, rose again. And we have the early Christian church, or as they were known for at least a little while, the Way, as in Jesus being the way, the truth, and the life, with no other possible path to get to God except through him. For about 1,000 years, the new Christian church followed the teachings of Jesus and his apostles, yes, with various cults and pagan religions and heretical sects splitting off, doing their own things, and obviously we had the survival of Judaism and the Eastern mystic religions. By AD 1000, we had the 5 prominent churches now: Antioch, Jerusalem, Constantinople, Rome, and Alexandria. Then the tree of religions starts to get a little crazy here. We have Rome moving in a pretty straight line of Catholicism. Alexandria died out except for the Arabic branch, which kind of merged with Judaism as well as splitting into a variety of other Middle Eastern religions, the most widely known being that of Islam. The Antioch, Jerusalem, and Constantinople churches all kind of merged and are now what we would know as the Eastern Orthodox churches. This was the Great Schism of AD 1054, where those Eastern Orthodox split from the Western or the Roman Church. If I'm correct, this is basically because both sides claimed they had the right to the throne of the popery and nothing would change their minds, no one would concede or something like that. Plus, did you see the color of the carpet in the Roman church? I mean, just awful. No way I could keep communion with those horrible people. Fast forwarding to the 1500s AD, we come to the time of Luther, who after, actually reading the scriptures, was very confused and concerned as to why the church didn't do the same. And then, maybe just for fun, follow the teachings contained therein. So he nailed his 95 points of contention to the doors of the church at Wittenberg in order to spurn a debate, resulting in the correcting of the errors. But it actually ended in the split from Roman Catholicism by those who were protesting the errors and intentional twisting of the scriptures in the religion they were actually claiming to be true and correct. This was the birth of the Protestants, right? The Protestant Reformation. Now from there, as Luther was warned would happen in giving the Bible to just the common layman to read and study and interpret, many denominations have now sprung up. Along with those denominations, we have various sub-denominations, cults, and heretical sects based off of those denominations, and that brings us to evangelical Christianity. Now, I would argue that many, if not most of us here right now, would claim to be an evangelical Christian. But pop quiz, hotshot, what does that mean? That's what I thought. I wasn't really able to define it either. I'm a Baptist, so maybe, is that it? If you look back at our dictionary that we cited earlier, evangelical is defined as, quote, of relating to or in accordance with the Christian gospel, especially one of the 4 gospel books of the New Testament. All right, I can get behind that. It also states, quote, of relating to or being a Christian church, believing in the Bible as the sole source of religious authority in salvation only through conversion and spiritual regeneration, and in the necessity of public witness to faith. Okay, I wouldn't pick too many nits with that one either. So, when did evangelical Christianity begin? Now, we could say in the book of Acts. We wouldn't be right, but we also wouldn't be wrong. Some say the Reformation of the 1500s. Some say the Great Awakening of the 1740s. Some say it was in the 1940s in America. Others say it started with Billy Graham. Still others would claim evangelicalism started with Rick Warren. And I guess I'm okay with any of those, except the Rick Warren one. If you believe that, you're wrong. You need to go repent and believe and be saved. Rick is a disaster. Prove me wrong. Anyway, today, the average person, me and very likely you, really has no idea what it means to be evangelical. I wasn't kidding when I said, I'm Baptist, is that it? Now, I'd lump Baptist, non-denominationalists, various portions of maybe Methodism or Presbyterianism, maybe? I don't know. I wouldn't think Lutheran or Episcopalian, definitely not Catholicism or Orthodox, right? But honestly, I have no idea. And as I've moved into the Reformed camp, I don't think Reformed would fit into the world of evangelical either, right? Now, one author says that evangelical can be defined through 4 core beliefs, kind of like the definition we read: conversion, Jesus Christ and Him crucified as central, biblical authority, and activism or evangelizing. And okay, I'm good with that, I guess. It's as good as anything else. So per that, I guess Reformed would be evangelical. But that doesn't feel right, at least to me. To me, evangelical takes on a more, charismatic tone, for lack of a better description, a more shallow theology, a lesser reverence. And admittedly, that's just my perception. I could be completely wrong in this, but overall, I don't like the term evangelical. Am I the only one? I feel like it has a very negative connotation to it today. At the same time, the word evangelical comes from the Greek word evangelion, which means good news or gospel, so maybe I'm wrong with how I think. Or have we tainted the good news, thus tainting the word, or vice versa? In fact, speaking of Billy Graham, he was once asked to define evangelical, and he couldn't. And he admitted that he'd like to ask someone what it meant as well. When you dig a little deeper, although evangelicalism by definition takes a high view of Scripture, not all evangelicals actually do. This is seen in both the church and in politics. We have conservatives and liberals both claiming evangelicalism. Well, intentionally getting a little political here, I can't for the life of me see how a legitimately born-again Christian could be a liberal. Not today. Not for a long time, in my personal opinion, but definitely not today. Not calling the conservatives saints, don't get me wrong there, but we, in a sin-cursed world, are literally looking for the lesser of two evils, or to put it in a positive light, the more biblically correct party. The liberals don't even affirm God or the Bible anymore, and don't let them fool you to tell you they do. Along with that, we have evangelicals that claim evolution, that don't believe in the flood, that refuse to believe in miracles, that believe the Bible is more of a mytho-history, etc., etc. We have evangelicals who say that we should unhitch from the Old Testament, that only speak on select passages or books of the Bible, and on we go. And this is why I don't like the term. I think it's been corrupted to the point where it's a net negative to call yourself evangelical at this point. So I came across an article from mid-2023, I just recently stumbled across it, and it's worth thinking about. Found on The Atlantic, via MSN.com, because I'm not paying for The Atlantic. Headline, The American Evangelical Church is in crisis. There's only one way out. This article is written by the Mr. Russell Moore. Now, Moore, if you don't know, was a professor of Christian theology and ethics at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, moved his way up in the ranks there. He was a pastor for a short time. He held various roles inside the Southern Baptist Convention, became the president of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, the ERLC, and is currently the editor-in-chief of the magazine Christianity Today, of which only one of those two words in the name of the magazine is mostly accurate. I'll let you decide which one. Is Moore a Christian? I don't know. I would love to say he sure is, but some of the views he's held, some of the people he pals around with, some of the things he's said and done, let's just say his fruit doesn't just scream, good tree. So, as Obi-Wan warned Luke Skywalker about the Mos Eisley spaceport, we must be cautious. Moore starts with his premise, quote, "The number one question that younger evangelicals ask me is how to relate to their parents and mentors who want to talk about culture war politics and internet conspiracy theories instead of prayer or the Bible. These young people are committed to their Christian faith, but they feel despair and cynicism about the church's future. Almost none of them even call themselves evangelical anymore, now that the label is confused with political categories. Sometimes I feel like I'm crazy," one pastor said to me just days ago. "Does no one see that the church is in crisis?" And I'm sure this is all on the up and up. I'm positive he's got these poor seeking young people just trying to overcome the obstacles their horrible parents have laid down in front of them. This is what we call pandering. And my goodness, is there a lot of these pandering people these days. Every politician out there, or nearly every politician, is pandering to who they hope to be as part of their base. President Potato has been all things to all people, a Jew, a Palestinian, an Italian, an Irish. He's black, he's an elite, he's a common man, he's probably a woman. I have no idea. He's been every religion, grown up in every religious and or ethnic demographic that exists or has existed in the 3 millennia he's been alive. This statement by Moore smacks at what Al Gore told a conference of kids in Washington, D.C. back in 2009. This was a No Parents Allowed conference, if I remember correctly. He was talking about the evils of man-caused climate change, of course, which hasn't done anything except for make him very, very rich and very, very fat. Thankfully, one child had the wherewithal to record Gore's words. He said, "When I was your age and the civil rights revolution was unfolding and we kids asked our parents and their generation, explain to me again why it's okay for the law to officially discriminate against people because of their skin color. And when our parents' generation couldn't answer that question, that's when the law started to change. There are some things about our world that you know that older people don't know. Why would that be? Well, in a period of rapid change, the old assumptions sometimes just don't work anymore because they're out of date." Celebrity voice impersonated. Now, just as every politician, particularly on the left, has always asked very insightful, very deep questions right out of the womb, does anyone believe he asked this? I sure don't. I don't believe he asked his parents this. I could be wrong. I'm not. I could be, though. This is pandering. He's just pandering to the children here, and manipulators are very good at pandering. Here, Gore made it a point to tell a room full of kids that they probably know more than their parents. Now let me challenge you. Ask any teen if they know more than their parents, and about 99% will tell you yes. That changes in a few years, but what we don't need is adult supposed authority figures pandering to kids to tell them that we adults refuse to change because we're stupid and brutish, and the kids need to change the world because we're just simply not going to. But here we are again with Russell Moore, intentional or not, it's intentional, doing the same thing regarding the Christian religion. Now, Moore goes on from there to play the victim. He's good at playing the victim, stating that he's had to endure his abuse by evangelicals, especially over his opposition to Trump and his views on racial justice and the church sexual abuse scandal. Now, I won't say that everything he's ever thought or said was and is wrong, but it's close. And to back up my claim, he has and is being heralded by The Atlantic, The Washington Post, NPR, Time Magazine, etc., as well as being the editor-in-chief of Christianity Today, all of these, of which are leftist rags at this point. If they were still in paper format, they wouldn't be worth lining a cage with them, bird or hamster or guinea pig. If you're a Christian who is loved by the left, I have to question that first part. Just saying. So in 2021, Moore, having been attacked mercilessly by Christians, left the SBC. What he had learned from Sunday school on about Christian morals and justice just didn't seem to fly anymore. He said that the church is in desperate need of revival, but even the meaning of that term has been destroyed, by Christians. It's all driven by money at this point, regardless of who is holding the revival. Then he quotes The Guardian, another leftist publication that has no love lost on Christianity, as saying, quote, "In the end, a market-driven religion gives rise to a market-driven approach to truth, and this development ultimately eviscerated conservative Christianity in the U.S. and left it in the possession of hypocrites and hucksters." See, they don't know what Christianity is or what it was, nor do they care about what happens to it. So I'm not sure we need to latch on to their take, just saying. But Moore likes it, so, there's that. He then goes on to lambast churches, saying that we tend to grab onto white nationalism, that we refuse to look at racial justice, that we prefer to cover up sexual abuse, but, quote, are lightning quick to expel congregations they find to be too affirming of women leadership. Russell, first, I'd argue that what you're writing is mostly lies, except for a fringe percentage of churches, of which you'll always have, unfortunately. You can't get rid of them all. And to the point, women in church leadership, or more accurately, women acting as pastors, which is what he's actually saying, is a no-no, Russ. If you don't like it, talk to Paul. Or more to the point, talk to the Holy Spirit. Maybe explain to him that he got it wrong. Quote, However, the confusion of nostalgia with revival is not simply the terrain of MAGA-right evangelicalism. Many mainstream evangelicals assumed that we were all just waiting out a moment of disorder. If we can just get through the 2016 presidential election, the pandemic, the racial reckoning protests and backlashes, the 2020 presidential election, and the seemingly constant evangelical leadership, sex and abuse scandals, we'll end up safely back in 2015. Well, that's clearly not happening. Really, Russell? Is that what we were all thinking? Moore truly believes that all we want to do is live in the 1950s again, which, some aspects would be nice, yeah. So would some aspects of the 1700s, for that matter, or maybe the 1st century AD. Does that make us wrong? Or is Russell desperately trying to stay a relevant youth at the age of 52? He then speaks of the fragmentation of evangelical Christianity today, quotes some psychologists, which again, not Christians, commenting on Christian things they probably need to keep their noses out of, frankly, because they don't understand it, one of which compared the fragmentation of evangelicalism to, quote, the destruction of the biblical Tower of Babel. But Moore counters, quote, and yet, the problem with the Tower of Babel was not fragmentation. The problem was unity. The builders were united by their own hubris in building something that would ultimately destroy them. The confusion of the languages and the scattering of people were the work of God. The answer was not to reassemble the old architectural plans and start again. The answer instead was in the next chapter with a lone figure, Abram of Ur, who heard a promise and trekked out into the desert, not knowing where he was going. Talk about a master's class on missing the point. Wow. And what I find curious by this great, unfortunate, victimized evangelical stalwart is that he didn't mention that the problem with the Tower of Babel was sin. Yet blatant disregard, once again, for the clear mandate handed down by God. The tower wasn't the problem. The tower was just a symbol of man worshiping man and thumbing their noses at God. Go and fill up the earth. No, we'll stay and worship ourselves. I thank you very much. He also didn't mention how Abram of Ur trekked out into the desert not knowing where he was going because he followed God's direction in faith. Faith that was counted as righteousness, we're told over and over again. Moore continues by saying that the answer to this crisis we're facing in American evangelicalism isn't to win and exile the losers. No. We're a big tent here. The answer, quote, is instead what it has always been. Those who wish to hold on to the old-time religion must recognize that God is doing something new. The old alliances and coalitions are shaking apart, and the sense of disorientation, disillusionment, and political and religious homelessness that many Christians feel is not a problem to be overcome, but a key part of the process. The insight of evangelical Christianity at its best is that any pilgrimage cannot start with a roadmap of certainty, but must begin with a cry of faith that says, like the noble disciple Thomas wrongly labeled as a doubter, Lord, we do not know where you are going. How can we know the way? John 14:5. And as I often ask in this podcast, is it? God is doing something new, is he? How does Moore know this? Granted, times change, right? The church clearly makes some changes. Candles and lanterns to electric lighting. Pastors with booming voices to pastors with amplification. Dirt floors to wooden boards to shag carpeting to church splits over carpet colors. No instruments to church organs to church bands. And now some guy sitting on one of those little slap box things, which is super cool. I'll just be honest. But the canon of Scripture was closed around 100 AD. There is literally no room in the book for God is doing something new. We were never instructed to reinvent the wheel or retool in order to reach the next generation. In fact, we were told by Paul, quote, but we preach Christ crucified, to Jews a stumbling block and to Gentiles foolishness, but to those who are the called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God, because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. For consider your calling, brothers, that there were not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble, but God has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise, and God has chosen the weak things of the world to shame the things which are strong, and the base things of the world, and the despised God has chosen, the things that are not, so that he may abolish the things that are, so that no flesh may boast before God. But by his doing, you are in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom from God, and righteousness, and sanctification, and redemption, so that just as it is written, let him who boasts, boast in the Lord. Or as Paul also said, quote, "And when I came to you, brothers, I did not come with superiority of word or of wisdom, proclaiming to you the witness of God, for I determined to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling, and my word and my preaching were not in persuasive words of wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power, so that your faith would not be in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God." Paul wasn't worried about something new, about retooling for the next generation. He had a singular message: Jesus Christ and him crucified. That was it. That's what it is today. But Moore, crassly denigrating religious nostalgia as nothing but a worldly tool, says that we need to have an organic movement in order to show the world, quote, that there's hope for personal transformation, for the kind of crisis that leads to grace. And that isn't the gospel. It sounds nice, it plays well in publications like The Atlantic, but that isn't the gospel at all. Hope for personal transformation. How about Paul in the book of Romans? Quote, "Therefore I exhort you, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a sacrifice, living, holy, and pleasing to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may approve what the will of God is, that which is good and pleasing and perfect. For through the grace given to me, I say to each one among you, not to think more highly of himself than he ought to think, but to think so as to have sound thinking, as God has allotted to each a measure of faith." But Moore isn't interested in that. Moore is interested in new and change, what he considers to be relevance, and he's being spurred on by people and organizations and publications that couldn't care less about this Bible or religion or that Jebus guy or whoever he is, or more for that matter. They're just kind of sitting back with a bowl of popcorn, just watching the show with demonic glee. And now I kind of want a bowl of popcorn. Moore concludes, quote, "Churches must stop the frantic rhetoric and desperate lack of confidence that seek to hold on to the Bible belt of the past. Instead, those worthy of the word evangelicals should nurture the joyous and tranquil fullness of faith that prays for something new, rooted in something very old, namely a commitment to personal faith and to the authority of the Bible. That starts not with manifestos and strategic roadmaps, but with small-scale decisions to reawaken the awe of the God evangelicals proclaim. We must refocus our attention on conversion rather than culture wars, and actually read the Bible rather than mine it for passages to win arguments. No individual can change the evangelical movement alone. Change comes first, person by person, then congregation by congregation. If enough of us would embrace this sense of homelessness as our new normal, as where we should have been all along, then we can rekindle a longing for a different kingdom to call home. In a country exhausted by the quest to make America great again, perhaps what we need is to make evangelicalism born again. And in the end, that's not a strategy, it's a prayer. Well, I mean, all that sounds real nice, Russ, but what does that mean? Because I'm watching churches that would fall under the banner of evangelical doing something new, changing congregation by congregation, and it ain't good, Russ. He says to read the Bible rather than mine it for passages, but how is this any different than, what's saying Andy Stanley, what he says, or so many other so-called evangelical leaders that, Jesus is love, and love is love, and that's all I have to say about that. Growing up, I was not a fan of hymns, and hymns are by far not the only songs or even the original songs that should or could be sung in church. And today, the odds are I'm not going to be hitting up Pandora or Spotify for a hymn playlist to take on whatever road trip I'm heading out on. That said, today, as a 40-year-old man standing in a church that values singing and song selection, ensuring the theological accuracy of each song, which is what all of our churches should be doing, mixing contemporary hymns and classic hymns, there is a sense of awe with the old hymns. And to have my daughter by my side for only a little while longer now, she's getting older, singing those hymns, many of which I'm ashamed to say were not sung, that she's never even heard until recently, I'd say that nearly every church service I find myself choking up just a bit. That's being very honest. There's something beautiful about those old hymns, meaningful, rich, true, timeless in their antiquity. As for a new thing regarding the Bible, regarding revival, regarding evangelicalism, no. That's all. Just no. There is liberty built in fact, to how the truth is presented, how the message is to be brought, how the biblical text is to be exegeted and exposited. There is not the liberty to do something new, to change the meaning of the text, to ignore some text and call it a passage to win an argument. We both know he's speaking of Paul's prohibition of women pastors here. Let's call a spade a spade. There's no room for heresy, blasphemy, eisegesis, or reading into the text, allegorizing, or any other form of Bible twisting. We don't have room for the Andy Stanleys of the world who want to slice the Bible down into what he thinks is important, all the while affirming sexual perversion he simply can't find spoken about in his scaled-down version of his newly thinned-out Bible. We don't need the seeker-friendly churches like Rick Warren, Stephen Furtick, T.D. Jakes, Michael Todd, or a whole host of wolves, including Russell Moore, that believe being all things to all people means that we need to be the world. Look like the world, act, talk, and think like the world in order to get the world to come and sit in our pews or our stadium seating and listen to a message that means nothing, that doesn't speak of our lostness, that doesn't proclaim the gospel, that seems to know all things except for Jesus Christ and Him crucified. Now, I personally don't care about denominations, conventions, conferences, terms like evangelical, or any of the other ways we classify ourselves. Do you believe the Bible is written cover to cover, including the dedication page and the maps? Do you believe in Jesus Christ as He is? Do you strive to be more like Christ every day? If those answers are yes, and you've repented and put your faith in Jesus Christ as your personal Savior, you're my brother or my sister. If you're skirting around the edges, if you're trying to tweak the Bible to make it more relevant to the generation today, if you believe that the Bible is completely accurate, but really, only for the time that it was written in, and the authors clearly couldn't have understood that there are some fantastic women preachers out there, or that there might come a day when there would be a racial tension that needs to be addressed, so here, I'm just going to help the Bible out a bit, well, then you're my enemy. I'll work with you. I'll witness to you. I'll try to answer questions and correct your errant thinking. But what I won't do is give you some room to explore, to try out some new things, because you have the arrogance to think that you're now the Savior, that God is all powerful, but He's also up there singing to Himself, "Oh, I get by with a little help from my friends. I get high with a little help from my friends. Gonna try with a little help from my friends." Yeah, if you think you need to help out God, I'm sorry, but the odds are pretty high that you're not saved. You're a false convert. And if you're in a position of authority like Moore is, you're a wolf and not to be listened to nor trusted. Although times change, technology changes, fashion, styles, likes and dislikes change, and all that can be, and it will be factored into the church experience, for lack of a better term. If we're looking for a new thing, a new way, a new interpretation, we're doing it wrong, damningly wrong, as it turns out. The gospel doesn't need our help. It needs to be preached. The Bible doesn't need updating. It needs opening. The text doesn't need to be made relevant. It needs to be revealed, exegeted, preached with all the authority the Bible carries. The problem with evangelicalism isn't that we're old fuddy-duddies harumphing every time a whippersnapper comes through the door with their rock and or roll music. The problem is that too many churches, and too many high-profile churches, have given up preaching the word unapologetically, unwaveringly, boldly, and authoritatively. If we want to save evangelicalism, which is a question in itself, the answer isn't to live under the lie that God is doing something new. That's an old man speaking his truth to some sort of power, hoping he won't be tossed aside by the younger generation. In other words, that's a man in the throes of a midlife crisis, not wanting to admit that he's not the younger generation anymore. The answer is to know and preach one thing, one old, well-worn, time-tested, tried and true thing: Jesus Christ and Him crucified. Wow, so we're already back to a goal update, huh? Could have sworn I had more time. But here we are. Just might as well get to it. This last month, generally speaking, hasn't been overly great, hasn't been terrible, hasn't been great. Specifically speaking of weight, or at least calories in, and pages read, those are really influenced by my work schedule. And this last month, we've had multiple visits and audits, along with free lunch or lunch out or whatever. So my reading time has been affected, my weight has been affected, and on top of that, the work in and out of the house. It's burning calories, sure, but not as much as working out, specifically. but it's still creating hunger, regardless of lunch at work. And it's making it so I'm kind of worn out in the evening from doing these other things, so I'm not working out. Basically, the world is against me and I'm a victim. I'm going to start a GoFundMe for myself to help with my emotional pain. If y'all can just dig deep. Okay, so most of you know that's a joke, but I'm going to make it clear just in case that's a joke. I can give you my Venmo if you want to donate. Also a joke, unless you're like uber rich, in which case we can talk. Anyway, let's get goal update number 5, 2024 edition, on the road, shall we? Starting with weight. Shocker, I went up a little bit. Did I have to go up based on all of the excuses I just gave? No. I could have managed this closer, but to be honest, a lot of things at work, a lot of things at home, stressors in my own life, stressors in my kids' life, which of course, translates to my life, etc., etc. Basically, I've only got a certain amount of willpower to give, and some things have to just kind of give sometimes. So in the last month, I put on 1.6 pounds. Not terrible over the course of the month, but obviously not the right direction. Fat percentage up 0.2%, muscle down 0.1%, as I'd expect, from not working out, gaining a little weight. To be honest, I'm not focused on weight. I'm not unhealthy. Generally, I feel fine. So here we are, just kind of hanging out in limbo. But as I'm wrapping up some of the projects at the house, I must prioritize working out. I definitely felt better working out. There's no question. Okay. To be honest, except for 1 week specifically, the calorie intake hasn't been terrible over the last month. If I had been focused on working out specifically this last month, I would have lost weight. There's no question. But I had a bad week, other weeks of no working out, it adds up. Slowly but surely, thankfully slowly but surely, it adds up. Okay, no point in belaboring that. Let's move on to reading. A lot of read on this one too. So the last month I added another 292 pages, averaging about 83% of my reading goal of 88 pages a week, which comes out to about 73 pages a week. That equates to about 3.5 days of reading per week, assuming that I do all of my reading over my lunch break. So you can see that the last month at work has been a little bit busier with whatever that's interrupting what I'm doing. I'm hoping this is unusual. However, looking at the work calendar, the schedule is coming up. We have a lot of audits. We have a lot of visits, and I've got a business trip coming up for a few days. And boy, I tell you what, I'm going to have to steel myself against delicious free food smells or something. I'm going to have to find a way to get my reading in also. Anyway, that said, I'm at 2,392 pages total. That's 53% of my goal for the year, about 5.5 weeks shy of 50% through the year. So reading is not something I'm overly concerned with. I think I'll do okay there. Moving to Bible reading. That's actually been going well. Finally. I'm into 1 Samuel somewhere. Eventually I'll be talking about that in my Being Berean segment. But let me tell you, some of the chapters of 1 Samuel have so much stuff in them. Now, I know the goal of most people, and what I've done in the past, is to try to get through the Bible once per year. But there is something to be said about slowing down, digging a little deeper, in my case, taking notes, summarizing what I'm reading, jotting down questions, and just doing some searching, on my phone for what certain things mean, or where the timeline fits, or where else is this person mentioned in the Bible, and so on. So, I don't know. I've been learning a lot, I hope. So my goal is to read 5 days a week. The last month I actually hit 6 days per week, except for one of the weeks I got the 5. So my progress versus my goal continues to climb ever so slightly, now sitting at 113.7% of my goal for the year. Well, like I said, I've got some trips coming up, both vacation and work. When you get out of rhythm, it generally results in some of these things kind of lagging or whatever else. So as I said at the beginning of the year, building a little bit of a bank against my goal is good because I know I will be using it later. Should I use it later? We can debate that, but I know I will be using it later. All right, moving along. Duolingo. I have no idea why I'm still trucking along on this thing. Stupid, silly languages. The last month is actually pretty good. Streak is still intact. As of the time I'm typing this, I'm at 162 days, nearing a half a year. As I said before, I'm learning, but wow, foreign language. My brain just does not work real well with this. And Greek is not easy. Or maybe I'm just terrible at this. I don't know. Maybe both, right? Yet, I endeavor to persevere. This last week, which actually factors into next month's goal update, but I found it funny and I didn't want to forget to tell you. This last week, I practiced for a whopping 37 minutes total. I mean, that's like nothing, right? So Duolingo sends you a weekly email with your progress for the week. At 37 minutes, which is like 5 minutes per day, I still spent more time, apparently, practicing than 66% of other users. 2/3 of the Duolingo users couldn't be bothered for 5 minutes a day, which I don't know about you, but I find that really funny. I mean, I totally get it, completely understand it, still find it funny. All right, moving on. Finally, prayer. Also, not a bad month. I had 1 week where I somehow only got 3 days in. I don't remember why. That was literally at the end of April. I can't remember what was going on. There's not really a good excuse for only getting 3 days of focused prayer in. But the other weeks, I did get my goal of 5 days per week. My progress versus my goal is sitting at 89.5%. It's a very slight uptick from last month. Not terrible. Not where it needs to be. Of course, 5 months into the year, moving that percentage up at this point, it gets more and more difficult. But that said, the Bible reading and the prayer have been probably the most consistent I've had in a long time. And I can tell, I can literally feel the difference in my life. Walking through the ACTS format, the ACTS format of prayer, for the A, the acknowledgement portion where you're supposed to acknowledge who God is, I've actually been reading a psalm every time I pray. Most of them are pretty short. They're fantastic to read and acknowledge who God is. The Psalms are very good at placing us where we're supposed to be and placing God where He is and acknowledging who God is. C, confession. This is where I'll admit I'm feeling the most difference. I've had more days where, look, yes, I've still got sins that need confession. That hasn't changed, right? But there's days, a lot of days here, that this section rolls through quicker. And I've had more nights where while I'm praying, I'm acknowledging that I've sinned that day, but overall, humanly speaking, I'm thanking God for a pretty good day. This is nothing that I'm doing. It's not like I'm focused and pushing and biting my tongue and all this. I like to think that this is the ever-churning process of sanctification that just keeps grinding away, making us a little bit more like Christ every day, right? Knock on wood. Wait, no, not knock on wood. That's a superstitious something. Sin. Anyway, if you're not actively reading your Bible and in prayer, I'm just going to tell you, do it. Get into it, do it. Figure out a way to do it. You'll feel it. You'll feel the difference. You'll notice the difference. And it'll make you want to do it more. So anyway, like I said, this goal update. Not terrible, not great, but not terrible. It's interesting to observe people. And I don't just sit there and watch people, from behind a tree with my binoculars. Often enough. But, looking at people around my age, there are those guys, and when I'm talking about people, I'm talking about men, right? There's those guys I absolutely just loathe, right? All in their fit and in shape stuff they just keep flaunting around. Then you have the guys that you can tell have just given up. Now, I know that we're all dealing with things. All of us, whether we're fit or not, we're all dealing with things, different things. There are reasons that some people stay in shape. And some of those are good reasons and some are not good reasons. And there's some reasons that people don't stay in shape, both good and bad, right? We're all kind of grinding our way through this life. Then you have people who are just driven, right? They live just to have goals and use every minute of every day in the most productive way possible. They love to have absolute control over everything, every aspect of their life, preferably every aspect of someone else's life. I don't know. They just love it, Then you have people who have no idea what's going on, right? They're just letting the world happen to them. They're hanging on for the ride, and wow, we can all tell. Then there's me. I feel like I'm kind of in the middle of all that. Now, I wasn't a middle child that I know of, but this is kind of the middle child syndrome, right? I'm kind of in the mushy middle here. I'm ignored. I'm invisible. Not all the way given up. Definitely not the picture of drive and self-control. And to be honest, I don't know that I really want to be in either of those groups. I'm okay in the invisible middle, like a good introvert. But that's also why I set goals, because I do need at least some accountability, right? I do need something to shoot for. So where are you? Are you the driven? Are you the lethargic? Are you invisible like me? And are you happy where you are? Are you keeping up with your goals? Have you set any goals? Are you starting to struggle with any of them? Middle of the year starts to get hard. Let me know if you want. Okay, guess that's it. As always, if you have any other questions, comments, ideas, tips or tricks or whatever, let me know. Okay, bye. And with that, sadly, we've reached the end of yet another episode of the Logical Christian Podcast. I feel we've bonded as we've laughed and cried and twisted our faces in incredulity. If you've enjoyed or found value in what you've heard, go on and do all the podcast things. And don't forget to check the show notes for links and contact info. Lawrence J. Peters said, "Against logic there is no armor like ignorance." Jesus told us that if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So stay in the word, stay logical, stay faithful, and until next time, God bless.